US President Donald Trump says Hamas will have hell to pay if the militant group does not disarm quickly. He was speaking at a press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who was visiting Trump's Florida residence, Mar-a-Lago. Both praised the relationship between the US and Israel, with Netanyahu saying Israel never had a closer friend than Trump, who's achieved incredible things in the Middle East. Trump said Israel has lived up to the ceasefire plan 100%. Speaking about Iran, the US president warned he'd quickly eradicate any new buildup of weapons. Asked about Hamas's disarmament, Trump said he expects them to give up their arms very soon.
We talked about Hamas and we talked about disarmament, and they're going to be given a very short period of time to disarm, and we'll see how that works out. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will be in charge of that from our side, but if they don't disarm as they agreed to do, they agreed to it, and then there'll be hell to pay for them. And we don't want that. We're not looking for that. But they have to disarm within a fairly short period of time.
To Laura Blumenfeld from the Philip Merrill Center for Strategic Studies at Johns Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies. At their presser, the two leaders only briefly touched on Gaza. What's that say about Trump's attempts to get Netanyahu to kickstart the stalled ceasefire?
We all went into this day expecting the meeting to focus on phase 2 of the Gaza ceasefire. I think what we learned today is that Trump is ready to settle for relative quiet in Gaza and focus on some other issues in the Middle East that are a higher priority. Number one, chief among them, is Iran. Today in that press conference, we learned that the red line for military action has moved from a nuclear buildup in Iran to ballistic missiles. That is a big win for Netanyahu, who often plays defense, especially in world opinion when it comes to Gaza. But on Iran, as Trump said, we fought a war together and we won. They're foxhole buddies, showing no daylight between Netanyahu and Trump. That was the surprise of the day.
So on Iran, could the US strike again?
They could, and they very well may, because that strike on Iran in June represented a high watermark for the Trump presidency. Very popular. There was very little cost to the United States. On the other hand, Americans are getting increasingly impatient with Trump. He's supposed to be America first. He's been looking out at the world an awful lot. We're kind of on semi-military footing with Venezuela and heavily mired in the mess in Ukraine and Russia. So there isn't a lot of domestic support, certainly, for another war, all-out war, certainly not with Iran. Also in Israel, it's not clear that the missile defense systems have been replenished and are ready to really ward off what would be a counterstrike from Iran on Israel. So there are some, serious question marks over that. But Trump certainly laid the line out very clearly that he prefers a deal and that Iran should take the deal that he offered them more than 6 months ago.
And picking up on what you mentioned before, the pair, the two of them are chummy on camera together at least. But behind the scenes, do Trump and Netanyahu really get along that well?
Well, I think that there is a lot of public praise, but yes, behind the scenes, there's private pressure. And we know that even from what Trump said today, that they don't align on every single issue. Certainly not when it comes to Turkey. Trump is, as he says, good friends with Erdogan, the Turkish leader. And Netanyahu is, all but outright hostile to the Turkish administration right now. On Syria, Trump underscored that he wants to see Israel cooperating with Syria. Right now, Israel's been very aggressive toward the new Syrian leader, and Trump is actually charmed by him. In Lebanon, he said, we'll just see about that. But another area where he openly admitted that there was friction between the United States and Israel is on the West Bank and settler violence. But as he said, Bibi will do the right thing. And all Netanyahu can do under those circumstances is smile his strained smile, because Trump has a lot of leverage over him right now.
Trump did sound overly optimistic, though, about the West Bank. Shouldn't more pressure be coming from the US when it comes to what's going on there?
I think the pressure is coming from the U.S. I think it's behind the scenes because Today's headline is no daylight between Israel and the United States, because that projects power, and Trump knows he can get more done that way. But I do think that, as Trump said, Netanyahu is going to do the right thing. There's tremendous asymmetry in the power relationships and the dynamic between Israel and the United States right now. Trump is increasingly popular in Israel, and Israel is less and less popular domestically in the United States. So Trump understands that he can make requests of Netanyahu, and he's just going to have to say, yes, sir. Look at how they were dressed. Netanyahu looked like a mini me. He's wearing Trump's red tie, a white shirt, and Trump's blue blazer. It was very clear that Netanyahu was trying to kind of staple himself to Trump, for no other reason that he's running for election. And Trump is the front runner in the Israeli domestic opinion right now.
The only difference there was one has got purple hair, one's got yellow hair. Middle East analyst Laura Blumenfeld, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Aaron David Miller was a Middle East negotiator who advised both Republican and Democratic secretaries of state. He's a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Do you think the Gaza ceasefire plan can move into phase 2 by next month?
No. I think Caesar famously said that Gaul was divided into 3 parts. Well, Gaza is divided into 2 parts. 47% Hamas controls, and they're demonstrating every day their total control. 53% is occupied and deployed by Israeli forces. So this division strikes me as the most likely reality continuing into 2026, because the 2 basic mechanisms that need to be created in order to change a divided Gaza, an international stabilization force, and functional governance, truly functional governance, not just in the Israeli occupied part of Gaza, but the part that Hamas occupies as well, they're still thought experiments.
Yeah, an international stabilization force that no one's putting their hands up for.
Right, and if Arab and Muslim peacekeepers are the ones that are looked to provide that sort of security, there's no way that they will deploy with Hamas in its current state. And it took from 1998 to 2005 to decommission as part of the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. And the IRA was guaranteed a share of power. This demilitarization process for Hamas is a ticket to obliteration. So they're going to be very reluctant and very risk averse. And the Israelis are not going to withdraw, maybe performatively, from parts of the territory that they're redeployed, but they're not going to redeploy in any serious way as long as Hamas exists as a vibrant military and political force in Gaza.
And isn't that the problem here, that Donald Trump's saying Hamas has to disarm, but without offering them anything?
Well, look, you're not talking about a negotiation between Israel and Germany that the United States is mediating. You're talking about a negotiation between the state of Israel and an organization which by American law and statute is considered a terrorist organization. And I think it's highly unlikely that if you're looking for a position on the part of any U.S. president that somehow splits the difference between what Israel wants and what Hamas wants, you're not going to get it out of this president. And this president is preternaturally pro-Israel, pro-Israeli in so many, many respects. No, I think reality, and the president said when they asked about how quickly, he said as quickly as possible. And as you pointed out at the top, he's made demilitarization of Hamas the key point of departure. What I think you will see in January is a lot of activity in the Israeli occupied area of Gaza. The Emiratis are considering building a 20,000 unit or 20,000 person sort of model village in Rafah. You may see elements of an international stabilization force deploy in the Israeli zone, the 53%. But it's hard for me to imagine functional governance or 20,000, because you need 20 to 30,000 peacekeepers. If Kosovo is any indication of what is required for peace enforcement, not just peacekeeping, We're talking peace enforcement here. You're going to need 20,000 forces, and I just don't see how that happens anytime soon.
The other thing back on the agenda is Iran. Let's listen into what Trump had to say, and we'll return to you in a moment.
Now I hear that Iran is trying to build up again, and if they are, we're going to have to knock them down. We'll knock them down. We'll knock the hell out of them, but hopefully that's not happening.
Is Netanyahu in a position to convince Trump to consider striking the Islamic Republic again?
I think if, in fact, U.S. intelligence or even Israeli intelligence made a compelling case that Iran's 3 enrichment facilities were not only engaged right now in the production of fissile material, and there was evidence of weaponization at declared or undeclared sites, I think the answer would be yes. But I think the Israeli concern now is not nuclear. The Israeli concern right now is that the Iranians are, in fact, restocking and repairing the damage done to their launchers, of their ballistic missiles. And those ballistic missiles, they inflicted, 25 Israeli casualties and a fair amount of destruction in Israel during the 12-day war. It's unclear whether the Iranians used a quarter, a third, or a half of their available stockpile. If they're resurging in terms of ballistic missiles, I suspect sooner rather than later, forget the U.S. now, but sooner rather than later, the Israelis will probably, in 2026, take some sort of action in the event diplomacy is not an option. It strikes me that it's hard to see one right now.
Aaron David Miller, thank you very much for joining us tonight from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace.
And thanks for having me. Happy New Year.
Bringing in now correspondents in Jerusalem, Tania Krämer, and Washington, D.C., Benjamin Alvarez, Gruber. Benjamin, Trump's meeting Netanyahu, what is on the agenda, do you think?
So one of the main topics will, of course, be this U.S.-brokered ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, not only because President Trump put a lot of his own political capital on that as part of his broader strategy for the Middle East, but also because his administration is using this as a deal-making of saying that they brought, we just heard him here there in the piece, saying that they brought peace to the region. But of course, looking at reality, that's not the case. For the White House, it is a top priority. That's also what the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said, who met Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu earlier today. They want to complete the first stage of the Gaza ceasefire, move on to the second phase. So we can expect more pressure behind closed doors by the White House on the Israeli government that has been accused of violating the ceasefire on a near daily basis, while also escalating these attacks in the occupied West Bank on Lebanon and also on Iran. And of course, another main topic will be Iran, with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu expected to make the case for new action against Iran and asking maybe even President Trump of giving him a green light for those actions.
Tania, what does Netanyahu want from Trump?
Well, I think we know what he doesn't want is actually more public pressure when it comes to implementing the Trump plan in Gaza. As we just heard, I mean, the process has stalled, and there's now the discussion over how it will go from the first phase into the second phase. And this is, of course, with devastating consequences for Palestinians in Gaza. Now, with winter coming in, the conditions are extremely harsh, but also we have to say, while those two leaders are talking, the ordinary people in Gaza don't have really much say in their own future. Now, what we understand from Israeli officials here is that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will most likely ask President Trump not to move forward unless the last deceased hostage will be brought back from Gaza, that Hamas is searching for the body. The family of Ran Gvili, that's the last hostage there in Gaza, is also with him in Florida to make the case. We also understand that Netanyahu would like to see more pressure on Hamas to disarm, but just today we heard from the Al-Qassam brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, reiterating that they won't surrender their arms as long as there's occupation. Now, there are also other items on the agenda, such as Lebanon. Israel has intensified its airstrikes in recent weeks against what they describe as Hezbollah targets. The Israelis are claiming that the disarmament of Hezbollah is going too slow under the ceasefire agreement. At the same time, we might hear from the U.S. administration about Israel's actions in Syria. But again, I think first and foremost, what's very important, we just heard it there from my colleague, is the issue of Iran. There were reports that the Israelis have new intelligence, and they're very concerned about Iran's ballistic missile program. And there have been some reports that Israel wants to seek support from President Trump for a potential new strike or attack on Iran. So we have to wait and see how President Trump is dealing with all of that. It's very clear Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing an election year. He's probably more unwilling to make more concessions, especially when it comes to Gaza. But at the same time, we're hearing, obviously, from President Donald Trump constantly that he's making peace in the region, although the reality on the ground is quite different.
So a lot to juggle, Tania. Benjamin, on top of that, Trump's busy with Ukraine, Venezuela, domestic issues. How likely is his continued support for Netanyahu and his actions in the Middle East?
So we just briefly also heard that in that piece with the former Israeli diplomat, politician. This meeting, of course, comes as a time when the White House is dealing with a lot of crises worldwide. You mentioned some of them. This is the fifth visit of the Israeli Prime Minister to the US. This time they're meeting in Mar-a-Lago, and this comes as both leaders appear to be diverging in their vision for the Middle East. There are many conflicts that President Trump is also involved in. He threatened also to leave these peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Some say that something similar might happen also here in the Middle East. But we have to come back to the point that even if there are differences or behind closed doors, if there are discussions, they try, of course, to paint a different image there. They need each other. Trump needs Netanyahu to avoid that his plan fails, and Netanyahu desperately needs the President of the United States in order also to manage these growing calls for his resignation back home.
Benjamin Alvarez, Gruber in Washington, D.C., and Tania Krämer in Jerusalem. Thank you.